Thank you, Andrew, very much indeed, and good afternoon, everyone. For those of you who have come from interstate or overseas, welcome to, without a doubt, the best part of Australia. What I'd like to do in the very short time I have with you this afternoon is direct my comments in three parts. To everyone, because I think we're all sportsmen and women, we're all competitive. Secondly, to then address my comments to those who are physically and actively sportsmen and women. And then if I've got time, just make a couple of comments of my experiences within the racing industry, and where I hear Andrew was very sympathetic to jockeys, I think I'm almost more sympathetic to those trainers who are at the lower end of the scale, who are desperately trying to stay alive, and it's in those areas that we often see some abuse taking place in order to earn an income. So let me just start, if I may. I wonder how many of you this morning, or when you woke up this morning, what was your first thought? Apart from what you did, because I can imagine what most of you did, which doesn't attract me at all, what was your first thought? How many of you gave thanks just for waking up? Go on, get them up. Get your hands up. I'm leaving shortly. I'm not going to pick on you. But just have a look at that. There's only 3 or 4. So what does that tell you? That you don't appreciate the greatest gift we have, which is the gift of life. And we take it for granted. And if you do not take life and waking up every morning, then you're subject to a whole lot of mood changes throughout the day and beyond. And just think about it for a moment, the gift of life. Have a look at what's happening around the rest of the world. Conflicts, earthquakes, floods. The reality is, even with all of those things happening and the economy the way it's running, we have as a society become so complacent that we don't even value waking up in the morning. So to me, waking up in the morning is the greatest gift I have. And I don't know whether I thank someone up there, down there, or the person I'm sleeping with at the moment. Right? Being my wife or my grandchildren, you name it, all right? But it is important. And that rock of that gift is the thing against which I measure the bumps I might face through the rest of the day. And I ask myself, when I hit one of those bumps, how important is that against the gift of life? And then you start to measure that we so often overreact to things that are occurring around us, which are meaningless in real terms. So the first message I want to leave with you today, if I can, is to think about how you live your lives. Whether you're 20 years of age or whether you're 100 makes no difference. Our lives are short and they can be taken from us so quickly. So start appreciating the fact that you're still here. Even though the body might not be as firm and responding as it used to, we are here. First point, gift of life. Second point, I use that gift of life, as I've said, as my rock, against which I measure other things. And that puts a balance into my life. Whether you're a sportsman or woman, whether you're not, you need to be able to judge things to get the priority right. Thirdly, it is so important in this day and age that we, in order to live as long a life as possible, as fit as possible, that we have good health practices, be that eating, be that exercise, etc. I'm not going to go into that today because it is so obvious, but it is a key ingredient in the quality of life that we live. And most people still continue to abuse their bodies by eating at the wrong time, eating too much, the wrong food, or in fact, perhaps cigarettes, or like me, whiskey, which I love. I think it's important to understand that just as you start your day, you've got to have a mechanism for finishing your day. And it's something you as an adult can teach your children and grandchildren, not by instruction, but by example. So when I go to bed at night, for a part of a second, I will reflect on what's happened during the day, what I did reasonably well and what I did less well. The things that I did reasonably well, I discard. And then I focus on the things that I've done less well or badly. And I ask myself, how could I have avoided that situation? Or to whom tomorrow do I owe an apology? That self-analysis helps me have a good night's sleep. There is no point not having a mechanism to deal with the things that cause you stress and anxiety in the day, and then allowing those to exist when you wake up the next morning. Because the likelihood is those things will continue to compound, and they can actually develop into very, very serious illnesses. They can lead to suicide. So I guess what I'm saying this afternoon, regardless of whether you're a sportsman, woman, but as a human being, if you want to live the best possible life, then you've got to accept more responsibility for how you live your life. And that starts with appreciating the gift of life. It starts developing a rock against which you can measure judgment. It means taking into account and accepting responsibility for how you live your life. It means for me having a mechanism at the end of every day of reviewing my day so that I don't carry any burden into the next day. And I've upset a lot of people at some times in my life, I can tell you. But I deal with it at night, and the next morning it's a fresh start. I give thanks, I'm up and about, I've got another 24 hours, and that's all that matters. And then I think we've got to recognise that we're all living longer lives. If in fact we're accepting responsibility along the lines that I've outlined, or the programs that you can develop yourselves for dealing with stress and anxiety and worse. We were talking a few moments ago, Glenn was saying, ever since he's retired from racing, I said, Glenn, don't talk to me about retirement, for God's sake. We never retire. If you mentally want to retire, you're at God's waiting room, right? You're just waiting to be picked up by the Grim Reaper and taken away. We've got to live full lives, physically and mentally, for as long as we can. There is no such thing, in my opinion, as retirement. And then lastly, I guess, we've got to understand the change is happening all around us. And it's happening at a very fast rate. It's happening so fast that the things that we grew up with, in many cases now, physical things, technical things, are irrelevant. And the only thing we can be sure of is that the rate of change is going to get faster. So it's why it is important that we develop the mechanisms as to how we live our lives. And then it's why I say we can educate our children. And we do it by example. So just one example, because I know I'm about to run out of time in 2 minutes. Mobile phones. They have their purpose, but they are evil, and they're destructive, and they're killing our children, because in many cases they are being abused. Not often deliberately, but unintentionally, where young people take them to their bedroom and exchange messages in the darkness of the night. And the person receiving it often takes it the wrong way, or taken it as happens. When you go to bed at night, you take your phone and you put it on the kitchen table, and you encourage your children to do the same in order that you can get a good night's sleep. We've got to adapt to this sort of thing, which is now so much part of our lives, and there's now new technology that says, if I want to ask for a 300-word essay on racing in Japan, I speak it into a piece of technology and it will deliver me that 300-word essay on racing in Japan. Our children are going to find themselves, they don't know how to write. They're not going to be able to add up. Even I, the other day, driving to one part of Victoria, had no bloody idea where I was going. And if it wasn't for the GPS system, I'd never have got there. But I've got to a stage now where I rely on the GPS to do all my thinking and my work. So we've got to adjust. So, living life. Can I now just turn to mental health in sports briefly? And I've had a fair bit of experience with a few sports over the years. The greatest challenge we have is the age at which our young sportsmen and women enter into their chosen profession. And invariably, they're very, very young. And that often interferes with their education, academic, but it certainly interferes with their growing up education, their social education. And they become caught in a cocoon where they are looked after, where their trainer, where their coach, where their club, swimming, football, matters not, starts doing everything for them from the age of 18 in our profession, but in racing so much younger. And it's because they are cocooned that they immediately step out of most normal social development with their own age group, with their own peers, and they become more and more focused or cocooned on the profession of which they're entering. And they're losing contact with what's happening in the rest of the world. And they're certainly losing contact with their own age group. So it is terribly important for all sporting bodies that when they take and accept a young man or a young woman into their particular sport, they have a huge responsibility to ensure that that child can continue to grow as most and as best possible in the world in which they live. So at Hawthorn, we used to say at a football club, every player had to undertake some sort of educational pursuit besides learning how to play football. Whether that was a trade, whether it was a university degree, mattered not, an apprenticeship, they had to have something going on in their lives which took them out of the cocoon and put them back in society. That's important because so many sportsmen and women don't have a long sporting life. And many of them are involved in sports that don't remunerate well. So therefore, when their time is up, not only do many not have the wealth to show for the effort they've put in, they don't have the contacts and they don't have the education to find and have a meaningful life. On the other hand, some sportsmen and women get well remunerated for short periods of time, and then they have to re-enter society. Some are well qualified and get back in, many don't. And then you start seeing them hit a brick wall. They don't know how to adjust to community life. I always say of our football players, I hope if your career is long enough, you leave football owning your own house. At least then you have an asset and that you have an education. But that is not often the way it goes. We also have to make sure that we give access to our young sportsmen and women to things outside their own chosen profession. How do you keep a young 18, 19, 20-year-old in touch with their classmates from primary and secondary school if in fact they have to go swimming at 4 o'clock in the morning, 5 o'clock, do a bit of training, do a bit of study, go back to training? How can you possibly do it if you're a sportsman playing football and you expect to train 3 or 4 days a week and then play football or whatever the sport is on the weekend? How can you possibly do it in racing if the demands of those who sit above us are so guided now as they are, of course, understandably, by gaming interests, which are taking over most sports that we are all observing right around the world? Here in Melbourne, I think I'm right in saying now we don't race on Mondays. Is that correct? Occasionally. Pardon? Occasionally. Well, there must be a day off. If you're serious about the people in your industry, there's got to be time out. And I know that's hard for trainers because someone's got to look after the stock, etc. But you can't say you care about the welfare of someone if you're forcing them to work 7 days a week and then only a few are at the peak, be they jockeys or be they trainers, who are earning a reasonable income, and the rest are desperately striving. And that they're breaking down. As I say, in my limited, I've had a lot of bloody horses that have broken down, and they're still doing it. But when I talk to people in the industry, my greatest worry is about the lower ranked trainers. They're the ones on whom the public put great expectation, their clients. Obviously they work with the jockeys, their staff, but we should never race 7 days a week. I don't care who argues the case or whether the sports betting agencies say so, it is always going to result in penalties, human penalties, that could be avoided. So we can do as many talks as this as you like, we can have as many psychiatrists and psychologists there, but if you drive people into the ground, you're going to hurt them. And it won't always be obvious, and then it becomes obvious for all the wrong reasons. So I'd also say we have a responsibility to those who enter our sports at a young age to make sure we find for them financial advisors who are honest and people of high integrity, so that they can help manage their income, particularly when they're 18, 19 or even younger, working in stable hands, etc. Because it is so easy to spend all that you've got as you go through life. It's so easy to be abused by some financial advisors. Again, there's got to be benchmarks of what you want to achieve for those that you take into your support. And if you haven't articulated what those are, even though we know a lifetime of a sportsman and woman can be 10 years, could be 20 years, might only be 2 or 3 years in some of the sports. Because you've cocooned them, you've got to make sure you put back into their education so that when they walk out from that particular sport after whatever length of service, they are in as good a place as possible. Can I just say, in terms of the racing industry, and I'm no expert on it, but I sit back and I observe, and as Andrew said, in 2000 I set up an organisation called Beyond Blue, which deals with depression, education, etc. And it was, even though I part-owned horses or owned horses, all very slow, the industry worries me because the pressures are enormous. And although we think we're doing the right thing by those who are part of the industry, the question is not about those who do well. The question is about the 90% of those who are struggling to do well, regardless of whether they're a jockey, a trainer, a stable rouseabout or whatever. And we haven't got it right yet. And so here we are in 2023. We're much better educated today than we were. But the world is spinning. It's getting faster. The pressures are becoming enormous. And the economy is going to mean great challenges for it all over the next 2 years. So I guess my question is to Andrew, to all of you in your own areas of jurisdiction, what are you doing to prepare your people for the next 2 years as the first bite? And where do you want to be in 5 years? And where do you want the industry to be in 10? Because unless people have an understanding of where those who lead them want to get to over a period of time, everyone becomes confused and it's all about me. Industries have got to be bigger than me. Industries have got to be about communities. And you rely not on people investing in horses, you invest in the public participating and attending the race meetings. So I read a book the other day, you might recall his name, Bernie Ecclestone, who was so much behind Formula One, sent me a special edition of the Formula One tribute to the individual who died last year, who bought 49% of Red Bull, the drink, and popularised it around the world and became a multi-millionaire. And he has lived on an ethos which I think is so right for all of us in life, in commerce, in sport, and not-for-profits. And his ethos was, we don't take our product to the people come to our product. The people come to our product. So what is racing going to be offering the public in 5 years' time? or 10 years' time, that are given all the competition that exists out there for people's attendance, what is racing going to be offering that brings people to the sport as opposed to us just running race meets? The same for political parties. I was speaking to some of those on my side of politics the other day, and I used the same expression. What are you going to offer that brings people to your side of politics as opposed to the opposition? Now, I've closed on this before I throw it open to questions, answers and abuse, whichever comes naturally to you, but I'm better at handling the abuse. Life is short. We can mould life if we wish to, but we can only mould lives for others if we ourselves accept responsibility for ourselves and through example, set examples for others. I go back to where I started, if I may. What is the purpose of living if you don't value life itself? If you don't value waking up in the morning? So, do you have a session tomorrow morning, Andrew, or righto? So when you get your numbers here, I want you to ask them all, who, when you woke up this morning, gave thanks for waking up? And if very few do, I now have their names and their numbers. And I will ring each of you individually because I've wasted my time here today. I want you to value life as I value life. We've only got one chance of it. Don't know when it'll end, but until it ends, I'm going to live it every day. So, over to you, sir. Questions, answers and abuse, and then I'm leaving you all to people a lot more knowledgeable than me.